So I would just sort of like be introducing our next speaker now. We are really proud to announce Camea Peca. She'll be joining us, and so our last topic, is also I think one of our most important ones for sure, because I think every trauma-informed journey starts from there. It's the importance of self-regulation. And Dr. Camea Peca will be joining us. Dr. Peca holds a PhD in psychology cognition and has an MS master's in psychoanalytical development psychology, along with a graduate diploma of arts in therapy and education, and an additional graduate diploma in child counseling. Professionally, Camilla has worked in a variety of settings, including adolescent shelters, inpatient psychiatric units, schools, specialty projects targeting physical and sexualized trauma. She has also an extensive experience with early developmental trauma and attachment-based therapy. So it's a really huge honor for me to introduce her. Thank you so much, and really, the floor is off to you.
Thank you so much. So I'm very excited to hear about TRE, because it's something that I often speak about to clients and share with them as a modality. It's not something I'm formally trained in, but I feel like it feeds into this talk about self-regulation so well. Because what I'm going to talk about today is the fact that all self-regulation starts in the body. So when we look traditionally at self-regulation techniques, they're not really self-regulation techniques in their purest form. They're cognitive techniques, not body-based techniques. So everything that we just spoke about in the last presentation really feeds into what I'm going to talk about, and that you have to regulate the body first. And this is the foundation of all the work that we'll do. So I'm going to go ahead and pop up my share screen so I can pull up my presentation to share with everybody. Let me just get it going here as I speak. So when we look at doing clinical work, the first thing we should be doing as a kind of interactive technique is teaching and modeling, and first modeling because we should be regulated ourselves, but then moving straight into self-regulation. The self-regulation techniques are going to be the foundation of everything that we want to instill, especially on trauma survivors, because remember, their nervous system, whether they're a child or an adult, has wired differently due to the trauma. So we know that we have to really target this nervous system that has different wiring, that looks different, that experiences regulation and dysregulation differently. We also know that a lot of people have had no experience, like David and Sai shared, of being co-regulated for. So the importance of self-regulation has a relational aspect as well, and that to feel safe with us, they have to feel that we will model, co-regulate, and interact with their nervous systems in a way that's safe. So this is a historical shift, because I remember even when I first started working in the field about 20 years ago, we were brain treating, we were doing conscious brain treatment. And we're now moving into this body-based process, because we know that you can't outthink a dysregulated brain. In fact, we lose the higher level functioning of the brain when we are dysregulated. We don't have access to executive function or complicated meditation techniques or strategies. We have a dysregulated brain. So what we have to do is, anytime we experience dysregulation, is we have to self-regulate through the body first. That doesn't mean that we can't use these techniques later on down the road, but we have to take care of what's happening in the body to get the nervous system regulated, but also to get the brain back online. So a lot of people that were originally trained in very cognitive-based techniques, even when you tell somebody something that is a verbal cue, like you are safe, their body doesn't feel safe. And they can't even absorb the verbal cue if the auditory system is shut down through the social engagement system. So remember that when we have dysregulation, there's all different levels, but we have a social engagement system that's designed to detect safety and also to detect things that are unsafe and fear. So we want to encourage people to do something with the body first. And a lot of times that means that they have to shift in to a different way of working. So we're shifting into this idea of building a safe inner base. And the inner base is what's going to allow us to do relationships, processing, empathy, all of the executive functions and functions that are housed in the prefrontal cortex. But in order to access those areas, we have to work with the body. And when I say work with the body, I'm not talking about something super complicated. I'm talking about very simple techniques to get back into the body, to create awareness in the body, and to be able to get in touch with what's happening in the body. So very interestingly, this process doesn't start with actual self-regulation. It starts with interoception. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But remember that what we have to do is we cannot encourage people or tell people to outthink their dysregulation. It just doesn't work. Telling themselves that they're in danger, their body is telling them that they are in danger. Their nervous system is releasing chemicals to deal with the danger, and they are moving into dysregulatory response. And the reason why these ways to kind of outthink the brain or the body don't work is because the body hijacks the brain. The neocortex, which is that higher level brain, is not functioning. So top-down approaches that are designed for the thinking brain or for the highest level brain aren't going to calm the body, which means that we have to think about a different way of treating trauma and working with dysregulation instead of the top-down approach from the brain down, from the body up. And the bottom of this process and the start of this process and the foundation which we can do all other healing work starts with self-regulation. The key thing, though, is that self-regulation is not actually where it starts. And a lot of people will start working with people and teaching them self-regulation techniques, even really good body-based self-regulation techniques. But we have to understand that there is something that happens first, and that's interoceptive awareness. So interoceptive awareness is being aware of what is happening inside the body processes. And it's the taking in of sensory information from the inside the body and outside the body. So this is a really important concept to keep in mind because what happens in many people that have experienced trauma over and over and over again are in a constant state of arousal is they shut down the body. They shut down the sensation in the body. And in a lot of clients that have experienced a lot of physical and sexual abuse, this means that they no longer feel sometimes whole parts of the body. This can be that I've had clients that cannot feel from the waist down. I've had clients that cannot feel their feet. A lot of times, in order to be able to survive, remember that these are all appropriate survival strategies, but in order to survive, they've had to shut down sensation in different parts of the body. So coming back into the body can be very scary. It can be something that they do need presence. They do need other people. They do need co-regulation. They do need guidance and support with, because they have purposely shut down the bodily sensations that were too overwhelming or too scary as a result of the trauma. Other people, you will be working with interoceptive awareness in a different way, and that is to turn the system down. So in these situations, we have the hyper presentation, which is that the system is overactive. They're feeling every single sensation, and it's chaotic. It's overwhelming. They're noticing every sound. Their sensory system and their alarm system is on high alert. In those cases, we want to turn the dial down on the interoceptive awareness. And in the cases where there's dissociation, where there's shutdown, where there's lack of awareness of body responses, we want to turn the dial up. Now, the good thing is that with interoceptive awareness, it's a fluid concept, so it can shift in and out of it. And in fact, we want to be able to shift in and out of interoceptive awareness, so we're not constantly hijacked. So a lot of times people will come to me and they'll say, well, that person's treatment resistant. And a lot of times we have to go back and look at whether body-based techniques, body-based self-regulation, interoceptive awareness has been developed. And remembering that somatic techniques can be used as the foundation of treatment. And when I say somatic, I'm meaning with the body. The soma is the body. So when I'm saying this, I'm talking about body-based awareness first, interoceptive awareness, and that's internal and external body, and then moving into the actual techniques once we notice that the dysregulation is happening. But the great thing about using self-regulation and body-based self-regulation is that you can go back to it. If you have already started with clients, if you're already working in a different way, it's something that you can use and go back to when treatment has hit a standstill. When you notice that there are changes, maybe even in the thinking, that you've worked really well from a cognitive perspective to reframe thoughts, to work with negative thinking, to work with anxiety, depression from that kind of prefrontal cortex point of view or that higher level thinking point of view. But they're still having body-based symptoms. And a lot of times people will still have headaches, neck pain, tension, aches, stomach issues, IBS, all kinds of somatic complaints that aren't shifting, even though they're doing better with the thinking part. And the reason why is because they have one part of the equation, but that's not the part of the equation that's actually needs addressing in the dysregulatory response. So what we want to think about is how we supplement the treatment that we're already doing with teaching body-based self-regulation, but also if we're starting treatment, how we use this as a basis or a foundational piece. But the great thing is you can bring in these techniques at any time. You do want to make sure that you have safety in the relationship to bring in these techniques. But I will tell you that from the very first time that I'm working with somebody, I'm modeling body-based self-regulation. So if somebody's sharing something with me, or I'm noticing something in my body, I'm sharing the noticing of the something in my body. I'm sharing what I'm going to do with that sensation. So if somebody is sharing with me, I've worked with a lot of trauma survivors that have, horrific stories of all kinds of different abuse. And when they're sharing that with me, I might share what's happening in my body in response to what they're sharing with me. I might also then show what I'm going to do with that. So it's a really important process that you're modeling before you even talk about teaching any of these techniques to them. They have to be relevant to them. So remember that relevancy is always king or queen. And so in so much as in order to be able to invest in wanting to be more regulated in their body, they have to see that this will benefit them in some way. And oftentimes the bridge or the connection is the shift in the somatic symptoms. So why is interoceptive and body-based awareness so important? Well, we know that all of the organs and the body and the brain are all interconnected. We know that the vagus nerve is a major nerve superhighway that's going to all these different areas, including the brainstem, the social engagement system. It goes all the way down the body into the gut, into the digestive system. So we know that there's connections and there's pathways. So if the vagus information, if the vagus nerve is not flowing with the information, with the messages of safety, there can be blockages, which causes issues in terms of being able to feel regulated, but also to connect and to work with others relationally. We know that this interoceptive awareness and the body-based self-regulation is also important because it's linked with cognition and decision-making. We have to be regulated in our bodies to access the full functioning ability of the brain. And we also know that when people have lower levels of interoceptive awareness because they're going low in terms of their dysregulatory style, they have higher rates of depression and addiction. Depression because they're shutting down the system in that dysregulatory response, And addiction, often in these cases, can be correlated with them trying to feel something. So they're trying to do something to get out of the lower dysregulatory space and to move into the balance. And all of these are totally normal attempts to try and get back into balance. But what we want to do is to introduce techniques, strategies, body-based tools or exercises to be able to bring the system back online without having to go in to these adaptations or mitigations that may be harmful for the body and the brain. So to describe interoceptive awareness in just a little more detail, it's the ability to feel the organs and also sensation. So it has to do with the state of the body, whether the body feels in balance, whether the body feels pain, touch, temperature, any of those sensations. And it's not always accurate. So there is a difference between interoceptive awareness and accuracy. We know that sometimes people will self-report internal states and body tendency that's not always accurate, especially when we notice that they have moved into dysregulation. And so the way that they describe what's happening in the body may not always be accurate. But we also know that in order to do emotional regulation, which, if I think about a hierarchy, I think interoceptive awareness on the bottom, then self-regulation, then emotional regulation. We have to be able to sense what's happening in the body before we can do something about it and then feel something about it or be able to work with the emotions that go with that. So it does work from the bottom up in terms of the processes. And what we know is that with trauma, that there tends to be a pattern of misinformation from the body. So the information that's coming from the body may have kept them safe in the past, in their trauma. In fact, 9 times out of 10, it has allowed them to survive trauma. But what's happening is that it's hindering them in the present because the system, the regulatory system, is overactive. So sometimes we will see very primitive reactions that are coming from the body, enactments, withdrawals, collapses, contractions, grimaces, snarls, glares, growls, all which would have kept a predator, whether it's a human predator or, our ancient predators, away from us. And so we are doing these things as an automatic response, as a safety response to protect ourselves. But in the present, they may be causing issues with relationships, inability to be able to perform at school, work, jobs, whatever it is that they're engaging with. So the misinformation is that the system is being tripped off or triggered at a frequency that no longer serves the person in keeping them safe when they move into different environments, and particularly relationship. So when you start working with clients, and they mentioned this in the TRE presentation, which I thought was excellent, is you want to think about what the goal of the work will be. For some clients are aware of the fact that they don't feel things in their body. This might be an exploratory process as you work towards interoceptive awareness to see what their awareness levels are at. There's great tools for measuring interoceptive awareness. There's the multi-dimensional assessment of interoceptive awareness, which is free online. And there is also, Stephen Porges has a body perception questionnaire, which is also free online. Which are great tools to get a baseline. So if your client is not quite sure whether they feel things in their body, there are measurement tools for this as well. But oftentimes when I'm dialoguing with people at the beginning of our relationship, I will ask, do you feel like you feel a lot of stuff in your body, nothing in your body? Do you overfeel? Are you oversensitive stuff that's happening in your body, or do you not feel anything at all? And a lot of people are aware if they dissociate, if they shut down, or if they feel too much. Sometimes you'll find that people will not be able to express this when they've dissociated for a very long time, and they'll say that they don't know. And that's okay. We're fine with that. But you are going to figure out what the baseline is. Where are we starting from? Do they have low interoceptive awareness? Are they over interoceptively aware? And we want to think about what the goal is. Is the goal for them to start feeling in their body? Is the goal for them to feel and notice enough where they can then pull in a self-regulation technique? Are we working to turn down a hypervigilant system, or are we working to identify shifts in the body before they end up in physical or relational pain? For me, we are always wanting to follow the path that they want to go down. Now, this may mean that they may say, no, I do not want to feel things in my body, but I do notice that I am very sensitive to what's happening in my body, and it's uncomfortable for me, or I spend a lot of time with pain or discomfort in my body. So in that case, the relevancy or the important thing for them is that hypervigilant piece. We do know, however, that when we are working with people that disassociate or that have shut down the body, that we do need to spend time, effort, and attention on being able to identify when shift is happening in the body, because that's how then we will then use the self-regulation tools to be able to target sooner and sooner and sooner. So the end goal is to catch the dysregulation when it's just a trickle, a small amount of those neurochemicals dripping down before it becomes a storm or a flood. So we want to move away from the full flood responses by catching the dysregulation and self-regulating before it becomes the full-blown flood. And this takes practice. So when I introduce self-regulatory techniques to people, I always tell them, this takes practice. You're reprogramming, you're adding new neuronal pathways to a different pattern or habit or way of being. And so you have to do it over and over and over again. And I explain to clients also that these are experiments. So it's not that this is the be all and end all. It's that this is a way to experiment with what works for your body. And some people will find that they need certain things to upregulate their system, so they're down low. And so the self-regulatory techniques we're going to use are going to be to bring the system back up into balance and upregulate the system. Other people will need to come down from a hyper state and will need to downregulate. So self-regulation itself, once we become aware of what the state is, what the sensation is, will need a different approach. It is not just breathing techniques. You can do breathing techniques after you upregulate a system to keep it in that balanced space. You may do breathing techniques once you've released the energy from the system and you come into that middle space. But breathing techniques are not always the first thing that people will want to do or will need to do given where their system is at. I work with a lot of people, and I loved the idea of the TRE and the shaking because it's releasing the stored energy, the stored trauma, the stored response in the body. So a lot of people will need to do something to physically release before they move into a strategy that is based on doing something that is maybe more breathing based or more relaxation based. Other people will need to wake up the system that's laid dormant. And that might mean that that self-regulation, that upregulation technique has much more to do with movement or shaking or touch, or actually just getting it out of the system and getting back in touch with the body. A lot of times we will do some heavy padding in those cases, waking the body up and getting sensation, getting back into the sensory-based body. So remember that you're not always going to use the same techniques for everyone. And if you find that an upregulation technique works well for somebody that is in that lower space, but that person also sometimes inhabits the higher space of dysregulation, you need to give them enough tools to be able to handle both spaces. So self-regulation is not a one size fits all. And the idea, just like the TRE, is that body-based self-regulation interventions are designed to bring the body into the present, to bring the person back into the present state, and to be able to stay embodied in the present. So your job as a co-facilitator in this state is to create safety, to create containment, to co-regulate these affective states, to suggest the appropriate and model the appropriate upregulation and downregulation activities so that the person's not left with that on their own. You're also working on strengthening vagal tone. So anytime we are working to stimulate the vagus nerve through a self-regulation activity, a body-based self-regulation activity, we're increasing vagal tone. And we also do that relationally through attuning and noticing what their body might need, through reciprocating, through modeling, through doing activities with them. You always want to model a self-regulation activity first. Then you want to invite them. Terminology is key, to do it with you. Then you want to invite them to do it again with you again. And if they feel comfortable, you can invite them to do it on their own. But you never want to give somebody to just do a self-regulation activity on their own without modeling it, co-facilitating it, or co-regulating it with them, and then giving them the opportunity to do it independently. And in this process, there's lots of different things you can use. You can use breath work, you can use trauma-based yoga, you can use progressive muscle relaxation. But keep in mind, what are you trying to do with that nervous system? How are you trying to bring it into balance? Are you trying to use techniques to upregulate and downregulate? And that's really a key feature when we think about this. So that's the end of my part in terms of sharing, but I would be really open to answering any questions, anything that anybody might want to dialogue with in regards to this.
Thank you so much. I think we have questions coming in the chat box, so
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to sort of like answering for you to answer them, Dr. Camea. That is incredible information sharing. Thank you so much. What is the difference? What are the different strategies that can be used for hyper attunement to body sensations?
So when we have what we call a hyper profile, and I refer to it with my clients very simply about like going high and going low. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm trying to identify their self-regulation or their dysregulation style. Do they go high? Do they go low? Or are they a mixed profile? So sometimes you will get people that are mixed profile, that in one environment, they may go high, in another environment or setting, they may go low. So when we have people that have a system that goes high, we are doing kind of more of the traditional body-based self-regulations to turn the system down. So we are coming back into the system, we are coming back into the breath, we're noticing parts of the body that feel safe or feel calm or more still, and we're bringing them into those parts. You can also completely move out of the thought process and move into movement. So these movements may look different depending on whether you're trying to upregulate or downregulate, but they might be slow, calculated movements to be able to work with the body and to get the body back into a balanced state. The hyperbrain is constantly trying to, is an anxious or an aggressive space. So that dysregulatory response, we also may need to do something to physically release. So if we are feeling that, we may need to push on a wall. We may need to stomp our feet on the ground. We may need to pound a pillow to release that physiological energy that's pent up, dysregulatory energy that's pent up in the system, and then to move into something that's more of a breathing technique or a calming technique.
Wonderful. We have another question regarding, can you give an example from your clinical experience when misinformation has been given by the body?
Yeah, so a lot of the misinformation, and when we refer to misinformation, we're really referring to an overactive threat alarm system. So something that perhaps even in the past was a real threat becomes something that trips off the system in the present, even though the threat is no longer there. The real threat is no longer there. It's a perceived threat response. So I have a client that she would come into my office often really dysregulated, like her body was very edgy. She was moving around. She was very kind of edgy, and she didn't understand what was happening. So I asked her, and she said, I had a good day. Everything went well today. There's nothing that happened. There's nothing that triggered me. And I asked her to notice when it happened the next time she came in, and to open her perceptual awareness. So when we become when we're in a threat response, we narrow our focus, we narrow our perception. So I asked her to open up her sense of smell, to open up her sense of sight, to use some peripheral vision, to look around, to pay attention to what was happening in her body. And it just so happened that as she was coming up, the same time of day, there was a group that was meeting that was a recovery group, and they were a drug and alcohol recovery group, and they were all outside taking their smoke break. Well, what happened is that the cigarette smoke was a trigger for her nervous system because her abuser would smoke before hurting her. So it was a complete sensory response. It was misinformation. She was having a full-blown sensory response, and he was not there, but the sensory information was stored in the body, and the trauma response was stored in the body. So we were able to work with that. But I asked people to open up perception. So one of the tools, when you notice that somebody's getting hijacked in the present and they can't figure out why, like, why am I feeling dysregulated? Why is my heart beating faster? Why is my breathing changed? Is just to open up the perceptual landscape to be able to start paying attention to other things that are happening in the body.
Wonderful. I think it's really amazing. How about working with grief symptoms?
So a lot of times, as people move through grief, they actually inhabit different places. So we know that the grief cycle is not like a linear process. There's different stages of grief. So sometimes and people will be in the grief stage where they're in that anger stage. So in that stage, we're going to do something differently because they're in that higher state. But what we often notice is that eventually we move down into or are in and out of that lower state, which is that depressive state. So when we're in that state, it's one about releasing. I still think that there's a place for release, and that a lot of times that can be audible release, that can be crying, that can be wailing, that can be done in a communal place, and then coming back into the body to be able to then move into good breathing, to move into relaxation, to move into out of the tightness and the tension that's being held in the body, and allowing the body to kind of melt into be in that space. But knowing that we will fluctuate through grief, and we may need different things at different times depending on where people are at.
There are a few questions regarding children as well, about how self-regulation helps with children, specifically if if a child has ADHD or Down syndrome. Could you share your information about what your experience has been on that?
Yeah. So ADHD and I work a lot with kids on the autistic spectrum as well. And nearly all the kids I work with have comorbid ADHD or ADHD like symptoms. And remember that ADHD overlaps with trauma. So if there's a history of trauma, it's more than likely that you will see either ADD, which is the dissociative shutdown response, or the hyperactive response, which is a normal response as well. So what I'm doing is I'm working with them to notice what's happening in their body, to notice what their body wants. So their body might want more movement. Their body might not want to stay still. And so I'm asking them and using interoceptive awareness of, hey, what does your body want to do right now? I'm noticing that you're wiggling a lot in your chair. What would it feel like to get up and to move the way your body wants to move? And so I'm encouraging them to listen into their body, and then to start to have some control over their body, because a lot of what we're telling them is to calm down, to stay still. And that's not what their body wants to do. And what we know is that children, especially with ADHD, will work much better if you allow them to move with their nervous system. opposed to putting a block or a shutdown on the nervous system. So I often invite those kids to notice what their body wants to do. I may work with them to exert a large amount of energy. So with those kids, I might encourage them to do some jumping jacks, to run in place for 1 minute. There's different breathing techniques, which are upregulation techniques, like the breath of fire, where you're breathing very fast and rapid through your nose, and you're getting a lot of oxygen in the system. Those are techniques to meet them where they're at. I notice that if I do that with a child with ADHD, I will have attuned, met them in their response. And once their body feels like it can be responded to and it's met and it's attuned to, they often organically will sit down or will find a spot that they feel comfy because they know they're allowed to. They know their nervous system can do what it needs to do. So I often will do a lot more movement with those kiddos in particular. And for them, I'm meeting them where they're at. And this might mean that during a session, you may need to have more tools in your space to be able to attend to this. A lot of times I will walk. So I'll walk with them. I will, if it's safe, we can go outdoors, we can walk inside the room. Sometimes if we are in a smaller room, we might do something in the space. So we might run in place, or we might walk in place, or we might take a ball and throw the ball back and forth. So we're using things to be able to attend to the nervous system as it is. And then when they're ready, we're shifting them out with them. What would it feel like if we were to do something else now? And that's a really great way to be able to transition, because you've met them where they're at and now you're taking them into a different physiological space.
I think it's really wonderful to hear from your experience, especially working with children and how to co-regulate children in the different sort of like nervous stages that they have. We have one last question before, and that's, kindly let me know about how does self-regulation help soldiers suffering from PTSD, and share of any experience, any of your experience that's there.
So I have some clients that I work with that are veterans and that have PTSD, and a lot of times they have developed they have a combination style. So I find that a lot of things they will shut down on because they've had to shut down to do what they needed to do in those war and horn situations. And then there's a lot of them that are automatically triggered into a strong dysregulatory, high dysregulatory, aggressive response, or due to usually sensory information that's out of their control. So I have a client that I work with that he says, I wish they would have never invented those things on the cars that where you, when you walk away from the car, it beeps. He's like, every time I hear that, I want to duck. So I'm working with him to desensitize the body to that response, to be able to manage when the body does that. How does he relax back his shoulders? How does he breathe in through his nose and out through his mouth? How does he shake off the response if he needs to in the situation? So we're teaching quick strategies to be able to work with in the situation. On a longer term basis with these clients, I'm working with them to have greater awareness of shifts that happen throughout the day. Because a lot of times what we see is relationally, this ends up being aggression that comes and gets triggered in the relationship with family members and partners and children at the end of the day. But what's happening is that there's stored up responses throughout the day that are sitting in the nervous system that aren't released. So I'm working with them to be able to notice what I call micro dysregulation or micro stressors throughout the day and to discharge those regularly. So sometimes I'll even have them set a timer every hour through the day to get up, to do something, to release anything, to check in with their body, to notice what's happening with their body, and to use a self-regulation technique at that point if they need to, so that you're not getting the store up of the energy and the dysregulation responses.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate sort of like the information. I think there's so much to learn, and I hope that the participants really enjoyed listening and learning from you. I think the wealth of information about self-regulation, I think specifically in the trauma-informed culture, I think that fits in really well. So Thank you for your time. I want to just share. I want to thank all the parties, all the speakers who kind of came in. I really appreciate Arizona Trauma Institute to be an affiliate of ours. Dr. Roderick, Dr. Peca, Dr. Horton himself, even David Briselli and Sai as well. I want to just tell people that if anyone wants this information regarding where to learn more of this from or how to sort of like get in touch with it, they can get in touch with us directly at the Trauma Release and Wellness Center, or they can even sort of like get in touch with Arizona Trauma Institute. I realize that I sometimes say sort of and things in the middle, and I feel like that's sort of like my stress responses. So I do recognize that definitely the summit has made me aware of my regulatory responses a lot more while I'm learning how to regulate myself through this process. Okay.